I am genuinely delighted to be here. As Dave mentioned, I've previously had involvement as a sponsor of the Academy a couple of years ago. And I know the Academy does some absolutely fantastic work in terms of bringing together commissioners, sharing knowledge, creating networks and providing those opportunities for commissioners to both continuously professionally develop of themselves, but also contributing to building capability beyond the current group of commissioners, which is a capability across public service we really need to invest in and build. So it's absolutely fantastic work. And as I say, before I get down into the detail of the reforms to the services commissioned for victims, some context in relation to the criminal justice system. It has been a rapidly changing landscape over the past few years, and the heart of these reforms have been the creation of police and crime commissioners, and we have also seen an increasing focus on understanding the need for our services and for commissioning those services, particularly at a local level. And so the role of commissioners has grown in importance, and certainly I think grown in recognition of that importance over recent years in the criminal justice system. And just seizing on PCCs, one of the crucial things to note is that they are not simply there to focus on policing. It's the and crime bit. Now, I think this provides a huge opportunity in terms of some of the reforms going on across the criminal justice system, in that we have a local leader with the opportunity to provide real influence across the full breadth of the criminal justice system. And by full breadth, I also mean into services around health provision and also working with local authorities. So there's a real opportunity for someone who's a real convener at the local level. But this changing landscape is one that means national government has to reconsider its own role within the criminal justice system. And so rather than focusing on the kind of the target-driven culture of the past and PSAs, actually there's a need for a much stronger focus on outcomes, a much clearer focus on understanding what the barriers are to local delivery and acting to develop and share best practice and create the right conditions for success locally, rather than counting processes and people. Now, all of that I think will be reassuring to commissioners. Of course, this is a hugely complex landscape, and how those different reforms interact don't always make it feel as simple as that. But it does mean that national government has to play that enabler role, and that crucial role creating the right conditions for success at a local level. And across the criminal justice system, one of the things we've been trying to do is sort of articulate more clearly, well, what are the steps nationally we can take to help and support that? And we published in June of this year a strategy and action plan called Transforming the Criminal Justice System. And it set out for the CJS a strategy and a headline level, but also a series of actions for reform across the system. But one of the key things it did was it set out a set of shared outcomes that all ministers and national agency leads kind of signed up to as that set of shared outcomes they are seeking to achieve, to provide a clarity of purpose at the centre in relation to criminal justice. Now, those outcomes: to reduce crime, to reduce reoffending, to punish offenders, to protect the public, to provide victims with reparation, and to increase public confidence, in particular among victims and witnesses, and then to ensure the system is fair and just. Not outcomes that will feel unfamiliar to those of you in the criminal justice system, and not rocket science. But they do provide a single, clear and consistent view of the shared ambition for the system as a whole. And as I say, agreed by those leading the system at the centre. And our plans to secure these outcomes in terms of improving effectiveness and improving the efficiency in securing them are set out in that strategy and action plan, which is developed through significant engagement with stakeholders and practitioners to identify the focus. And those are areas such as tackling the root causes of waste and failure in the system, so issues around improving case file preparation, which no matter which bit of the criminal justice system you are in will always impact upon you. Grasping the opportunity that technology provides in digitalising the criminal justice system, transforming how practitioners themselves can work, and also how the public can access and engage with the criminal justice system. And crucially, better support for victims and witnesses throughout the criminal justice system and putting them at the heart of the criminal justice system. And that, I think, is the crucial point to make. rather than seeing victims and witnesses as something we need to separately consider a bunch of add-ons for, how do we ensure that the need of victims in the criminal justice system is central to the reforms we're doing? We know that improving how the criminal justice system operates will improve the experience of victims within it and improve their confidence. Whether that's the trials and hearings going ahead as planned, the information they're provided by whom and by when, and their experience of being on the stand in very practical terms as a witness. So our approach has been to incorporate that into our key reforms. And one part of that is how we've approached the Victims Code, which I'll come on to talk about in a second, which is absolutely critical from a commissioning perspective in terms of understanding the key obligations on criminal justice agencies. But also in areas such as the pre-recording evidence, so how we can use technology better to support vulnerable witnesses, or how to reduce the distress in cross-examination. And this strategy and action plan is a kind of published government document, but it is not one which we see as a sort of traditional white paper that we as policymakers put up on a shelf and then we write the next one. We've set up the National Criminal Justice Board, again, not a new innovation, but one which brings together those leaders with common purpose, and they are driving the actions in that action plan and monitoring the progress of them, but also, crucially, monitoring the improvements in performance, or if there aren't improvements in performance, identifying those and seeking to tackle them. So, in effect, trying to get the criminal justice system to operate in almost a planning cycle, using the board to kind of drive that against the shared outcomes. Not straightforward, but that's the approach we're trying to take to establish how we work in reforming the criminal justice system. I should also note that the work has been significantly informed and challenged by the Victims Commissioner, Baroness Helen Newlove, who sits as a member of the Criminal Justice Board and who represents views of victims directly to government. One of the other things I want to highlight at a national level is understanding that we need to consider the effective CJS response to crime as a critical part of how we're reforming the system. So where is it that the CJS response could be more effective? And nowhere is this more in people's minds than in relation to child sex exploitation and vulnerable victims of sexual violence. And so we work very closely with the task force chaired by Norman Baker on sexual violence against children and vulnerable people to ensure that the criminal justice system is responding effectively in that particular priority crime. In terms of the victim and witness elements, some of this goes back to the 2012 consultation around getting it right for victims and witnesses, and that provides the basis on which the reforms of the way in which victim services are commissioned are being taken forward. And at that time, we recognised that there was a lot that was good about the existing delivery of services, but there was also a lot more that could be done. And a real emphasis was established on the need to focus on the individual victims' needs and supporting those victims to cope and recover as far as it was possible for them to do so. And as well as the new model for victim service commissioning, that 2012 work set out the kind of the building blocks for the new Victims Code. And last month, following consultation specifically on the code, we set out and published the revised Victims Code, which crucially, from a Commissioner's perspective, sets out the information and services victims can expect to receive from criminal justice agencies in England and Wales. One thing that's quite interesting about how we went about developing that code was, as well as those traditional consultation responses, trying to use more innovative open policy making techniques, particularly trying to reach audiences which we find more difficult to reach, such as children themselves, and there's a new section in the code targeted at children, where we had partnering with the NSPCC, a particular online forum, as well as using Childline to provide surveys to their users of their websites, and web chats and so on and so forth. So, which really helped us inform the code in a different way to the traditional consultation approach. And the new code is now published in plain English and I mean plain English. The previous one really wasn't, and it is a significant improvement. And we will be launching more details around how we will implement the code in December. I say in December, it is now, of course, December. The year is flying by. Alongside we'll publish an updated witness charter, which fits alongside that. So, commissioning of services. I mentioned that the code is crucial. In terms of the obligation it sets out, which are also consistent with those obligations under the EU Victims Directive, they are the kind of bedrock of kind of some of the key elements of what commissioned services will need to provide. So how are we going about reforming the services that we commission for victims? Well, firstly, following that consultation, ministers set out we would increase the MOJ budget available for victim services from around 50 million up to a potential 100 million. This is based on collecting new revenue from offenders through increasing and extending the surcharge, increasing PNDs and motoring FPNs to get more income from offenders into victim services. And there will be a new model through which those victim services will be commissioned. And that will see the majority of services commissioned by PCCs who are best placed to understand and commission services that meet local need, though a number of services will continue to be commissioned nationally where there is a strong case to do so. For example, services that are particularly specialist around victims of human trafficking, homicide services, rape support, and a court-based witness service, as well as some telephone helplines. There is also a commitment that a proportion of the additional revenue that comes in to fund services will be made available for specialist services such as victims of domestic violence and particularly sexual violence. We're therefore taking forward those proposals with the view that PCCs will start commissioning locally from October 2014. And the key elements of the programme to bring about that change include legislating to give PCCs a full range of powers to commission victim and witness services, and that legislation is before Parliament, and we hope that it will receive royal assent in the spring. We are also recognising that we need to support the VCS sector in getting ready for this new commissioning, and so we have commissioned training which will help the VCS sector respond to the new commissioning environment, as well as providing PCCs with funding this year so that they can start to build capability of local service providers as well. We have also published and will revise based on feedback a commissioning framework for victim services, and that has learnt a lot from good practice and is very focused on victim needs and the outcomes. Crucially, PCCs are so well placed to link up with other forms of local partnerships and best support victim needs across healthcare and wider support pathways. And so one of the things we are doing at a national level, and I'll be particularly interested in views from colleagues around the room, is to better understand how these different pathways and different services can come together. And we recognise the complexity of this landscape and that this landscape is one that is undergoing some constant change. So there's more we need to do nationally to set out more clearly that strategic intent around alignment, but also practically what can we do to ensure those join up at a local level. And so I'd encourage those of you working out in local areas that you continue to engage in local partnerships and look at the opportunities to join up across those services as commissioners and indeed as providers. Because I think there are considerable opportunities for that alignment to improve service provision, but by the same token, there are risks in terms of gaps emerging. At the national level in particular, we've focused with Department of Health and NHS England around sexual violence services, as we've recognised this is an area where we're hearing already of some confusion in terms of who is commissioning which services, and we want to ensure we respond quickly to clarify the position. So looking at the role of CCGs and other health partnerships in relation to the PCC role as they take on that service, and ensuring that those pathways are clear. At a national level, we have also begun the commissioning cycle for those services MOJ will nationally commission. We've gone through a process of needs assessment and service review for each of those services and are moving into the commissioning phase. A competition for rape support funds closed last week, and we'll be assessing those bids for services from April 2014. We have issued an advert for the human trafficking services at the end of November and are now undertaking initial market engagement on the basis of a contract to commence from July next year. And in other areas we are finalising the approaches and the specification for those other national services so we can publicise our approaches next year. And we are also working actively with PCCs to support them as they become the commissioners. And as well as a range of communication and engagement activity, recently a lot of our effort has focused around the referral service. Now, this is the referral of victims' details from police forces to victim services, needs assessment and the provision of information to victims as are all required in the Victims Code. Now, referral service were not originally intended as services to be delivered nationally, but through our initial work with partners, it was suggested that there was a strong case for some or all of those services to be delivered through national structures. So we are working and engaging with PCCs and asking them whether they, well, indeed we have asked them whether they wish the MOJ to take on a role in commissioning these services or whether they wish to commission them directly. And following that engagement, receiving a proposal from PCCs, ministers have agreed that MOJ will look to extend the current arrangements with victim support for referral, needs assessment and associated services for a further 6 months, and that's until March 2015, but with a small number of PCCs commencing commissioning or delivery of those services from October 2014, and we want to work with those PCs to ensure that that is a successful transition. So where possible, we are seeking to form the right partnerships to ensure both a safe transition, but also, as commissioners, the right choices in the right areas. The other thing is the increased revenue I referred to earlier is now beginning to be realised. So budgets are already increasing for victim services. We forecast to spend some 69 million this year compared to 50 million last year. And that's allowed us also to provide some more funding to PCCs to support setup of their commissioning and building the sector capability, which I referred to. And budgets are set to continue to increase. And as I mentioned, we have that target 100 million. We expect to get up to 75 million next year. And PCC's budgets for victim services will also include funding to enable them to build capacity and commission restorative justice services where they meet the needs of victims. So across this landscape, you see a significant change in how we see victim services being commissioned in the future, but also significant opportunities for commissioners to form new partnerships and to look at how services can best be prepared to meet local needs. But it is a period of significant change. We are actively trying to work with partners to make this a success. But we need the support of commissioners and the support of colleagues across the country to ensure that the proposed reforms lead to improved services for victims and witnesses of crime, and that the commissioners of those services and related services are the key to making that a success. So I thank you all very much for listening to that. But more importantly, I thank you for engaging in the changes that are coming to how we commission victim services as commissioners. So thank you very much indeed.